There's a particular kind of silence that most people run from. It descends on a Friday evening. The plans fell through. The phone is quiet. There's no one coming over, no one calling, no noise to fill the room. And in that silence, something stirs. A restlessness. A low hum of discomfort that rises until it becomes unbearable, and suddenly you're scrolling, texting, reaching for anything to kill the quiet. Most people never examine that feeling. They just smother it. With entertainment. With company they don't even want. With connection that isn't nourishing, just distracting. But here's what that silence is actually telling you: you have built your inner world on borrowed furniture. Everything inside you, your sense of worth, your peace, your happiness, has been handed to you by other people. And the moment they step away, the whole structure collapses. That's not living. That's dependency dressed up as a social life. The Stoics had a name for the man who needed external conditions to be at peace. They called him a slave, not in chains but in spirit. A man whose mood rises and falls with the approval of others, who cannot sit alone without becoming anxious, who needs constant company because the alternative is facing himself. What we're going to talk about today is not isolation. It's not misanthropy. It's not building a wall between yourself and the world. It is something far more radical. It is learning to be the source. Learning to be the man who can sit in that silence, and not just survive it, but inhabit it. Own it. Draw something powerful from it. This is what the greatest minds in history discovered. Not as a preference, but as a discipline. A daily practice. A philosophy that made them unbreakable. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly how they did it, and how you can too. If this kind of thinking speaks to you, subscribe to Inner Steel. We don't do motivation here. We do transformation. Let's begin. Point 1. Solitude is not loneliness. Stop confusing them. In 1849, a writer named Henry David Thoreau walked into the woods outside Concord, Massachusetts, built himself a small cabin on the shore of Walden Pond, and lived there alone for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. He didn't do it because he hated people. He did it because he couldn't hear himself think around them. The world of the mid-1800s was, by our standards, extraordinarily quiet. No internet. No television. No smartphones. And yet Thoreau felt the noise. The social obligations. The small talk. The constant performance of being seen and approved of. He wrote, "I had 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, 3 for society. But the chair he sat in most, the one that gave him the most, was the first one. The chair for solitude." What he discovered at Walden Pond wasn't emptiness. It was density. A richness of inner life that most men never access because they are too busy filling the silence with other people's voices. Here is the distinction that most people miss. Loneliness is the pain of unwanted aloneness. Solitude is the power of chosen aloneness. One is a wound. The other is a weapon. When you are lonely, you feel cut off. Abandoned. You look outward, desperately, for something to fill the gap. But when you are practicing solitude, real solitude, chosen and deliberate, you feel whole. You are not waiting for the world to come to you. You have turned inward, and found that the interior is vast. The man who cannot tell the difference between loneliness and solitude will run from both. He will treat all quiet as a threat. He will interpret every moment alone as evidence that he is unwanted, unworthy, forgotten. And so he will fill his life with noise, social noise, digital noise, the noise of constant stimulation, to avoid ever feeling that emptiness. But the emptiness was never the problem. The problem was that he was trying to fill it with the wrong things. You cannot fill a hunger for self-knowledge with other people's company. You cannot fill a hunger for peace with entertainment. You cannot fill a hunger for meaning with distraction. Thoreau came back from the woods not broken, not damaged, not antisocial. He came back with 2 years of observations that became one of the most widely read books in American literary history. He came back with himself. That is the first thing you must understand. Solitude and loneliness are not the same country. One is a prison. The other is a kingdom. The question is which one you've been living in, and whether you've ever tried to tell them apart. Point 2. The need for approval is learned. Which means it can be unlearned. When Marcus Aurelius was a boy, he was chosen by the Emperor Hadrian to be groomed for eventual leadership. He was taken from his family at a young age, molded, observed, judged. His worth, in the eyes of Rome, of the court, of the world, depended entirely on performing correctly in the eyes of more powerful men. Most people who grow up in that environment, constantly evaluated, constantly watched, become addicted to approval. They spend their lives trying to recreate the feeling of being chosen, valued, seen. Marcus Aurelius spent his adult life fighting that instinct. His private journal, what we now call the Meditations, is full of reminders to himself not to care what others thought. He wrote, "How much time he saves who does not look to see what his neighbor says, does, or thinks." He wrote, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." He wrote these things not because they came naturally to him, but because the pull toward approval was a war he had to fight every day. Here is what Marcus understood, and what modern psychology confirms: the need for external approval is not a personality trait. It is a learned behavior. It is a coping mechanism developed in childhood when we needed others, genuinely needed them, for survival, and discovered that approval meant safety. But you are not a child anymore. And yet most men are still operating from a child's survival strategy. Still seeking validation. Still managing their behavior around the question, what will they think of me? The philosopher Epictetus, who was, at one point in his life, an actual slave, understood this better than almost anyone. He had no reputation to manage, no status to protect. And yet he was freer in his thinking than the emperors who owned him, because he had grasped a truth that those men had not. The opinion of others is outside your control. It is, in Stoic terms, not your concern. He wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." The approval you've been seeking from others, it was always a substitute for something else. For self-approval. For knowing yourself so deeply, so honestly, so completely, that you do not need a verdict from outside to tell you where you stand. That knowledge is not arrogance. It is earned. It comes from sitting with yourself long enough to know what you actually value, not what you've been told to value, not what gets likes and nods and praise, but what you, alone, in your deepest and most honest moments, believe to be true and good and worth living for. You cannot discover that in a crowd. You can only discover it alone. Point 3. Your relationship with yourself sets the ceiling for every other relationship you will ever have. In the 1940s, a young Austrian psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl was deported to Auschwitz. His wife was taken from him. His parents were killed. His manuscript, the book he had spent years writing, was destroyed on the day he arrived. Everything external that had defined his life was stripped away with systematic efficiency. And yet Frankl survived. Not just physically. He survived inwardly. He emerged from the camps with a philosophy that he would spend the rest of his life sharing with the world. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, he wrote something that has never left me. He observed that in the most brutal conditions imaginable, conditions designed specifically to exterminate the human spirit, the men who survived, psychologically, were not the physically strongest. They were the ones who had an interior life that could not be taken from them. A sense of self that did not depend on circumstances. A relationship with themselves that was deeper than anything the guards could touch. He called this the last of human freedoms. The freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That freedom lives in the relationship you have with yourself. It cannot be given to you by a partner, a friend, a family member, a community. It can only be built in solitude. In the hours you spend knowing yourself rather than performing yourself. Now think about what this means for your relationships with other people. If you are empty on the inside, if you have no real relationship with yourself, no interior life, no peace that doesn't depend on external input, then you will enter every relationship as a beggar. You will need things from people that they are not designed to give you. You will need them to fill you, validate you, complete you. And that need is suffocating. It pushes people away. It creates a dependency that corrodes connection rather than deepening it. But the man who has built a genuine relationship with himself, who knows who he is, what he stands for, what he finds beautiful, what he finds true, that man brings something into his relationships. He is not empty. He is not needing. He is offering. There is a profound difference between choosing to be with someone and needing to be with someone. Love chosen freely, from a place of wholeness, is sustainable. Love driven by need, by the terror of being alone, is not love at all. It is attachment. It is desperation wearing a romantic disguise. Your relationship with yourself is not something to work on after you've sorted out your relationships with others. It is the foundation on which all the others rest. Get it wrong, and everything built on top of it is unstable. Get it right, build it patiently, in solitude, in honesty, and every connection you form will be transformed by it. Point 4. Boredom is the doorway. Most men never walk through it. In 1654, the French mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote a line that has become one of the most quoted sentences in the history of ideas. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He wrote this in the 17th century. Before smartphones. Before social media. Before streaming services and 24-hour news cycles and the infinite scroll. Pascal understood something that we have nearly lost entirely. The capacity to tolerate boredom is not a trivial thing. It is the prerequisite for every kind of serious thought. When you are bored, something happens. A discomfort rises. A restlessness. The mind looks for stimulation it cannot immediately find, and in that vacuum, it begins to move. It begins to generate. Images, ideas, memories, questions, things that would never arise in the middle of noise or entertainment begin to surface in the stillness. This is where creativity lives. This is where self-knowledge lives. This is where the kind of thinking that actually changes your life happens. But most men never allow themselves to be bored. At the first hint of discomfort, the phone comes out. The headphones go in. The television turns on. The discomfort is killed before it can become anything. There's a story about the painter Georgia O'Keeffe, who spent decades living largely alone in the desert of New Mexico. People would visit and ask how she stood the silence, the emptiness, the absence of culture and noise and society. She would look at them with what witnesses described as something like pity. She couldn't understand what they meant by emptiness. The desert, for her, was overflowing. There was more to see and think and feel in 1 square mile of that landscape than in an entire city, if you were willing to be still enough to perceive it. What O'Keeffe had cultivated, and what Pascal was diagnosing the absence of, is the ability to move through boredom into the territory that exists on the other side of it. Because boredom is not a destination. It's a doorway. It's the discomfort that precedes depth. The modern man, enslaved to his phone, never gets through the door. He stands at the threshold, feels the discomfort, and turns back every single time. Start sitting with it. Not with your phone. Not with music. Just with yourself. Let the discomfort come. Let it rise. Breathe into it. And then, slowly, let it transform into something else. What waits on the other side is not emptiness. It is you. Point 5. Stop outsourcing your emotional regulation. There is a man, and you may know him, because he is everywhere, who can only feel calm when someone talks him down from his anxiety. Who can only feel good about himself when someone tells him he did well. Who can only process a hard day by narrating it to another person. Who cannot sleep until he has received a message, a sign, a signal that he is thought of, needed, wanted. This man is not weak in any dramatic way. He may be successful. He may be respected. He may appear to function perfectly well. But he has quietly, without ever deciding to, handed the controls of his inner world to other people. And those people, however well-intentioned, are unreliable. They have their own lives, their own moods, their own capacity for presence that has limits. And when they fail to show up, as inevitably they will, he is left without the ability to regulate himself. Psychologists call this emotional codependency. The Stoics had a simpler name for it: bondage. In ancient Greece, a student came to Epictetus with a problem. He said his friend had been imprisoned unjustly, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. He was suffering over his friend's suffering, tormented by something he had no power to change. Epictetus listened, and then said something that startled the student. He said that the student was in two prisons. His friend was in one. But the student had put himself in another, the prison of believing that his peace depended on his friend's circumstances. Epictetus was not counseling indifference. He was counseling something harder: the discipline of keeping your inner world yours. Of not handing the key to your peace to circumstances you cannot control, including, crucially, the emotional states and behaviors of other people. Emotional self-regulation is a skill. Like any skill, it is built through practice. It begins with something simple. The next time something destabilizes you, a criticism, a rejection, a bad day, an argument, before you reach for your phone to process it with someone else, pause. Sit with it. Feel it. Name it, specifically. Not, I feel bad. What exactly do you feel? Where does it live in your body? What is the thought underneath the feeling? This is the beginning of owning your interior world rather than outsourcing it. It's a practice that takes months, maybe years. But every man who has done the work, who has built the capacity to regulate himself, to be his own source of calm, to talk himself down and think himself through without needing rescue, describes the same thing on the other side: a freedom so complete it feels almost physical. A groundedness that nothing can shake. That's what you're working toward. Not detachment. Not numbness. Sovereignty. Point 6. The man who enjoys his own company is dangerous in the best possible way. In 1888, Friedrich Nietzsche, traveling alone through the mountains of northern Italy, wrote a letter to a friend in which he described what he called his condition. I am well, supremely well, better and better, and I am alone. Now, Nietzsche is a complicated figure, and this isn't an endorsement of everything he believed. But in this particular observation, he was touching something real. Something that men who have mastered solitude all describe in different words. There is a quality of aliveness that comes from genuine enjoyment of your own company. Not forced solitude. Not grudging isolation. But the active, deliberate pleasure of being with yourself, of finding your own thoughts interesting, your own pursuits satisfying, your own presence enough. This quality is, in the eyes of most people, deeply attractive. Not because it's a manipulation tactic, but because it's real. The man who is genuinely self-contained, who does not need you, but chooses you, is a fundamentally different energy than the man who is desperately seeking connection. One pulls people toward him. The other pushes them away. But this matters for reasons that have nothing to do with other people's perception of you. Because the man who enjoys his own company is never beholden. He is never willing to compromise who he is to keep someone around. He is never scared to be alone, because he knows that aloneness, for him, is not a punishment, it's a preference. He makes better decisions. Because he makes them based on what he actually wants, not on what will keep people close. He holds his ground in relationships, because he is not terrified of the alternative. He walks away from things that diminish him, because he knows he will be fine. This is the man who is dangerous in the best possible way, dangerous to mediocrity, dangerous to people who would exploit his loneliness, dangerous to the habits and relationships and situations that have been slowly reducing him. And this quality, this self-contained aliveness, is built in solitude. In the hours you spend genuinely engaged with your own mind. Reading. Thinking. Creating. Moving through the world with curiosity rather than need. Discovering, over time, that you are, when you get quiet enough to hear it, actually someone worth spending time with. If you're finding value in these ideas, this is what Inner Steel is built on. Subscribe, and we'll keep going deeper. Point 7. Presence is a practice. And solitude is where you build it. In the Zen tradition, there is a story of a student who came to a master and said, I have been meditating for 3 years. I sit with my thoughts for an hour every morning. But I am still anxious. I am still unsatisfied. I am still not at peace. The master poured the student a cup of tea. He poured slowly, deliberately, until the tea overflowed the cup and ran across the table and onto the floor. The student watched, confused. "The cup is already full," the master said. "How can I give you anything?" The student's problem was not that he was meditating wrong. His problem was that he was full. Full of thoughts about the past. Full of anxiety about the future. Full of comparisons, judgments, plans, fears. He was sitting in solitude with his eyes closed, but he wasn't actually present. He was somewhere else. He was everywhere else. Presence is not the absence of thought. It is the ability to be fully here, in this moment, this body, this breath, this room, without the mind dragging you backward into what was or forward into what might be. And the place where you build that ability is solitude. Not distracted solitude. Not solitude with headphones in and a screen nearby. Real solitude, the kind where there is no stimulus except the present moment and your experience of it. Where you learn, slowly and with difficulty, to stop fleeing the now. This is what contemplative traditions across every culture and century have understood. The Buddhist monks with their meditation practice. The Christian mystics with their hours of silent prayer. The Stoics with their morning reflections and evening reviews. The Taoist sages who would walk in nature for hours, simply attending to what was. They were all doing the same thing, training the capacity for presence. And they were all doing it alone. Because presence cannot be trained in the middle of noise. In the middle of social interaction, you are always performing, always managing impressions, reading others, navigating the complexity of another human being. That is a skill worth having. But it is a different skill. The skill of presence, the ability to simply be, without reaching or fleeing, can only be cultivated in the space where there is nothing to perform for. That space is solitude. And here's the remarkable thing: when you build genuine presence in solitude, it transfers. The man who has sat with himself in stillness for a year, who has learned to be here without fleeing, is more present in company than the man who has spent every moment surrounded by people. Because he knows how to be in a moment. He isn't distracted by what's next. He isn't half somewhere else. He is here. That quality, full, undivided, unhurried presence, is one of the rarest and most valuable things a human being can offer another. And it starts, always, in the quiet. Point 8. Grief and difficulty must be met alone before they can be met with others. In 1905, the poet Rainer Maria Rilke received a letter from a young man, Franz Xaver Kappes, who was struggling. He was in military school, miserable, uncertain about his path, afraid of his own sadness. He wrote to Rilke asking for advice, perhaps expecting consolation, perhaps expecting to be told it would get better. Rilke wrote back something unexpected. He wrote, "I would like to beg you, dear sir, as well as I can, to have patience with everything unresolved in your heart and to try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer." He was not telling Kappes to process his grief in community. He was not telling him to seek therapy or friendship, or the comfort of others. He was telling him to go into the darkness of his own uncertainty, alone, and learn to inhabit it. This is one of the most countercultural ideas in this entire conversation, because we live in an era that is deeply suspicious of processing difficulty alone. We are told constantly to reach out, to talk about it, to share, to lean on our people. And there is truth in that. There are moments when another human being is exactly what is needed. But there is something that can only happen when a man meets his darkness alone. Something that cannot happen in the presence of others, because the presence of others, however well-intentioned, always changes the shape of the experience. When someone is watching, you perform your grief differently. You edit it. You manage it for their comfort. You reach for resolution faster than the grief actually needs. Alone, the experience is allowed to be what it actually is. The grief can be enormous without frightening anyone. The confusion can be total without needing to be explained. The darkness can be met without reassurance, which means it must be metabolized entirely, in the body, in the silence, in the depths of the self. And men who do this, who learn to go into difficulty alone, and come back changed, carry something afterward that men who always sought external rescue do not. A knowledge of their own resilience. A trust in their own capacity to survive. A relationship with difficulty that is not fear but something closer to respect. I am not saying refuse help. I am saying that some rooms can only be entered alone. And learning to enter them, to walk into your own darkness without pulling someone else in with you as a shield, is one of the most powerful things you will ever do. Point 9. Build an interior life so rich that company becomes a pleasure, not a necessity. There is a moment described by the writer and philosopher Montaigne that has stayed with me for years. Montaigne was a French nobleman who lived in the 16th century. At the age of 38, he withdrew from public life entirely. He moved into a tower on his estate, lined the circular room with books, and began to write. Not for publication at first, just to think. To examine his own thoughts. To know himself. He wrote at the entrance to his tower library these words. "Here is my seat. This is my throne. I tried to make my authority over it absolute, and to sequester this one corner from all society." He did not do this because he hated society. Montaigne loved company. He was by all accounts warm, curious, humorous in conversation. But he understood something that the most fulfilled people across history seem to understand, that a rich interior life is the engine of a rich exterior life. That the more deeply you inhabit your own mind, through reading, through writing, through reflection, the more you have to bring when you do choose to engage with the world. This is the final and perhaps most important point. The goal of learning to be alone is not to end up alone. It is to transform what aloneness means to you, and by extension, to transform every relationship, every interaction, every choice you make. The man who has built an interior life has resources. He has thoughts that interest him. He has questions he is genuinely pursuing. He has aesthetic sensibilities, philosophical positions, areas of deep knowledge, creative endeavors that fill his time not because he's hiding from loneliness, but because he is genuinely absorbed. When that man encounters other people, he is not searching. He is not reaching. He is arriving with something. He is choosing the interaction because it adds to a life already worth living, not because it fills a void that he cannot fill himself. Think about the men you most admire in history. The philosophers. The artists. The military leaders. The scientists. Almost without exception, they were people of serious inner lives. People who spent significant time alone with ideas, with nature, with craft, with the great books of human civilization. Their company, when they gave it, was extraordinary, because they had something to give. This is what's available to you. This is what's waiting on the other side of the discomfort of aloneness. Not just peace. Not just self-sufficiency. An interior richness that makes every moment of your life, alone or in company, more vivid, more meaningful, more entirely yours. Closing. Let me leave you with this. There is a line from Marcus Aurelius that I return to often. He wrote in his private journal, the journal he never intended for anyone else to read, these words. "Nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Not in a different city. Not in a new relationship. Not when he finally gets the job, or the money, or the recognition, or the circumstances he's been waiting for. In his own soul. That retreat, that inner sanctuary, is not given to you. It is built. Brick by brick, in silence, in reflection, in the long, slow work of coming to know yourself and, eventually, to like what you find there. The world will always offer noise. It will always offer distraction. It will always offer the comfort of company and the numbing comfort of never having to face yourself. But the men who become something, who build something real, who love something truly, who live with a quality of intention that most people only glimpse and envy, those men chose differently. They chose the quiet. They chose the difficulty. They chose themselves, first, and let everything else flow from that foundation. That choice is available to you. Right now. Today. Not in some dramatic, life-altering declaration. Just in the next moment you feel the urge to reach for distraction, to pause instead. To sit. To be present with yourself for 5 minutes without asking anything of anyone. That's where it starts. And if you want to go deeper, into Stoicism, into discipline, into the kind of mental toughness that genuinely changes your life from the inside out, then subscribe to Inner Steel. This channel exists for exactly this, for the men who are done with the noise and ready to do the real work. We'll see you in the next one.